All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a highly specific chronological timeline of Islamic power shifts, straight from our source material. We're going to break down a sprawling history that spans centuries, looking at exactly how global influence transitioned, shifted, and evolved to create the geopolitical landscape we're dealing with today. Understanding this historical interpretation is absolutely crucial because it offers a very unique lens on how ancient decisions are still rippling through our modern headlines.
To wrap our heads around this massive history, we've structured our explainer into 5 key eras. We'll start with the Prophecy and the Golden Age, hit the printing press turning point, look at division and King Faisal, the rise of Iranian resistance, and finally, modern geopolitical conflicts. Let's get right into the first era.
Part 1. The Prophecy and the Golden Age.
The source grounds this entire narrative in a 1400-year-old prophecy. Basically, a hadith predicted a future where Muslims would be huge in number, but completely lack actual global weight. The exact phrase used? Like foam on water. Plentiful, stretching as far as you can see, but easily swept away by the current, unable to strike fear into the hearts of their adversaries. It's a pretty haunting metaphor, right? And it sets up the central dilemma of this entire historical interpretation. How does a massive population end up without ultimate geopolitical control?
And the contrast the source sets up here is just wild. Because, for 1,000 years following that prophecy, the narrative claims Islamic empires were the undisputed global superpowers. We're not just talking military might. For a solid millennium, the world's leading scientists, mathematicians, and astronomers were Muslims. They had the cutting-edge tech of the era. They built sprawling universities, advanced medical practices, preserved ancient texts, you name it. They were the intellectual and political center of gravity, and the rest of the world was effectively just following their lead. This golden age is the benchmark for everything that comes next.
Which brings us to Part 2, the printing press turning point.
The source pinpoints one highly specific, absolutely fatal misstep, where this 1,000-year power dynamic just abruptly flipped. The Ottoman Caliphate rejected the printing press. While Europe was eagerly adopting this revolutionary machine, printing hundreds of books in the exact time it took one scribe to handwrite a single copy, Ottoman scholars allegedly declared the printing press haram, or forbidden. This one single decision, the source argues, was catastrophic. It basically handed Europe the keys to rapidly educate its masses and seize global dominance, while the Islamic world was left clinging to much slower traditional methods.
And the ripple effects were huge. The source directly links this explosion of mass literacy to a total societal rewiring in Europe. Books are suddenly in every home. Crucially, women gain unprecedented access to education, and boom, you get a new, intellectually empowered generation that produces scientific titans like Newton, Galileo, and Edison. But meanwhile, as Europe is aggressively expanding outward, the narrative claims Muslim empires turn their focus inward. They essentially exhausted themselves with internal Shia-Sunni sectarian debates, handing over their superpower status to a newly enlightened, technologically superior West.
All right, Part 3. Division and King Faisal.
According to the source, this technological and educational decline completely paved the way for the physical division of the Middle East. After World War I, European powers basically carved up Middle Eastern territories like pieces on a chessboard. This incredibly volatile era of redrawn maps eventually leads to the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. But amidst all this profound fragmentation, a major unifying figure steps up, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia. He rises to power determined to bring fractured Arab nations together, stabilize the economy, and actively push back against Western superpowers.
And here is where it gets really intense. When traditional military warfare failed against US-backed forces, Faisal deployed what the source calls the oil weapon. He made the globally shocking declaration that not a single drop of oil would be sold to Israel or its international handlers. Just cut them off entirely. It was a strategic masterstroke that sent shockwaves across the globe. International economies crashed, and massive inflation crippled the West practically overnight. The source directly ties this bold, crippling act of defiance to Faisal's subsequent assassination by his own nephew, framing it as the ultimate price for challenging the new global order.
Moving on to Part 4, the rise of Iranian resistance.
After Faisal's tragic death, the source abruptly shifts geographical focus. The mantle of resistance, it argues, moves to Iran. First, Ayatollah Khamenei takes control during the 1979 revolution, famously teaching his followers to completely reject all foreign influence. Almost immediately after this, Iraq's Saddam Hussein launches a massive attack on Iran, a devastating move the source claims was heavily backed by Western powers desperate to contain this new revolution.
And during the bloody chaos of this turbulent war, a student of Khomeini named Ali Khamenei barely survives an assassination bombing that permanently paralyzes his right hand. Undeterred, he eventually rises to become the president of Iran.
To really help us grasp the sheer scale of this newly entrenched power center, the source drops a staggering statistic: 10 million people. 1 crore. That's how many flooded the streets for Ayatollah Khamenei's funeral after the grueling 8-year war with Iraq finally ended. It's an historically unprecedented public display of solidarity. Following that massive event, Ali Khamenei is elevated to supreme leader, taking over the torch of this resistance movement.
This leads us right into our final section, Part 5, Modern Geopolitical Conflicts. Now, a quick reminder, we are neutrally explaining the very specific timeline and claims presented by our source material here, illustrating exactly how they view these cascading historical events.
The source maps out a highly controversial timeline, starting with the horrific 9/11 attacks, which triggered the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. But the source makes a highly specific claim here. It argues that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu heavily pushed for the subsequent invasion of Iraq, allegedly based on false atomic weapons claims. And after Iraq's infrastructure was entirely dismantled, the narrative asserts Netanyahu didn't stop there. It claims he spent the next 25 years relentlessly pressuring the U.S. military apparatus to target his ultimate geopolitical goal, Iran.
To deeply understand the mindset driving this geopolitical tension, the explainer highlights a metaphor allegedly used by a former Israeli prime minister. They described Iran as the head of an octopus, with highly dangerous, heavily armed tentacles spreading across the entire Middle East. According to the source, the overarching military strategy shifted definitively. It was no longer about fighting those proxy tentacles in neighboring countries. The ultimate goal became striking directly at the head of the beast, Supreme Leader Khamenei.
So, as international pressure mounts and the threat of war looms, the source claims Khamenei made a brilliant, highly defensive strategic move. He temporarily neutralized the immediate threat of a U.S. invasion by officially declaring the creation of nuclear weapons to be haram, or religiously forbidden in Islam. By putting this into religious law, he essentially stripped away the exact primary excuse adversaries had used to justify the Iraq War, effectively stalling Netanyahu's military plans and buying his nation crucial time.
Now, we must impartially report a highly subjective, explosive claim from the source material regarding a sudden shift in U.S. policy. The narrative states that Donald Trump had strictly and publicly opposed attacking Iran for 25 years. However, the source makes the massive allegation that the release of the highly controversial Epstein files served as an instrument of immense political blackmail. According to this specific charged narrative, it was this intense behind-the-scenes pressure that forced Trump to abruptly abandon his anti-war stance, ultimately partnering with Netanyahu to authorize military strikes against Iran. The source's narrative hits its dramatic climax with the claim that after Iran targeted U.S. military bases in retaliation, Israel countered with unparalleled force. The narrative alleges 200 fighter jets were deployed, utilizing 30 specialized bunker buster missiles. These are highly advanced weapons designed to penetrate deep underground facilities before detonating, and the source claims their sole targeted purpose was to assassinate Supreme Leader Khamenei deep inside his secure bunker, finally fulfilling that long-desired goal of severing the head of the octopus.
Leaving those specific, charged modern claims aside, the source material ends by circling all the way back to the very beginning. It leaves us with a profound question about the source's worldview. If that ancient prophecy of Muslims being vast in number but powerless like foam on water has indeed been fulfilled, are we simply watching a 1,400-year-old cycle tragically repeat itself on the modern stage? And more importantly, as we watch these monumental power dynamics shift in real time today, how will these continuous cyclical struggles shape the world for the next generation? Thank you so much for unpacking this timeline with us.